Yeah, so I welcome you all to the lecture 2, that is your the production situations, crop classifications and agroclimatic zones. So, lecture 1 we have given a brief introductions about the crop production, what is crop productions and what are the components of crop productions. So, that has given a basic understanding about the crop production systems. Now, we will discuss about the when you go for the crop production. So, and also you are going for the simulation exercise. So, there are different production situations. So, in this lectures we will discuss what are the production situations we are going to have the simulations for the crop yield forecasting, and we can see also we discuss about the crop classification. You should have some understanding about the different type of the crops. Then what are the agroclimatic zones, that gives understanding of the weather parameters, agroclimatic zones where the crops are grown. Let us see the what are the we are covering here, particularly production situation. If you see we have the different production situation, 3 different situations. One is the actual yield, actual productions, attainable yield, say attainable productions, or the potential yield, potential productions. These are the 3 production situations. So, this will when you go for this simulation exercise, also we make simulations for these 3 production situations. First of all, we need to understand what are these 3 production situations. This helps you to understand the yield gap. We say yield gap whenever we are targeting to maximize productions, our job is to minimize the yield gap. So, we should know what is the yield gap, so that the input management should be aligned to minimize the yield gap, that means enhancing production. So, these 3 production situations, actual, attainable and potential productions. What is the actual yield? Actual yield is the yield what we get from farmers field. The farmers usually they do not use the scientific approach for the crop management. They grow a particular variety depending upon the genetic the potential of this variety. They do take care of the weeds, pests and diseases, but they do not make a proper management of the water and nutrients. Only they try to protect the crop from pests and diseases, applying the pesticides and taking care of the weeds, but they lack in the proper input management like water and nutrients. So, whatever yield we get from farmers field, that is the we can say actual yield, or we say the farmers yield from the farmers field. And what is the attainable yield? Say attainable production, as you say. So, that happens in the experimental station, demonstration site, where we do take care of the weeds, pests and diseases. On the top of that, we do apply the precise amount of water and nutrient. The yield we get that with the proper plant protection measure and the precise input applications, that you say as the attainable productions, which is achieved in experimental stations. And the potential production, as you say, that is the potential production when the particular variety, say potential yield, that is defined by the variety developer or the breeders. That happens when you supply all the inputs at optimum level. That means, the crop is protected from pests and diseases. We supply the optimum amount of water and nutrients. At the same time, we provide the optimum weather parameters like carbon dioxide, solar radiations, temperatures, humidity. So, these are maintained very optimum. So, the yield you get and the controlled environmental experiment, that you say as the potential productions. So, now it is very clear, potential production, the maximum production that can be achieved while supplying all inputs at optimum levels. that means the crop is well protected from pest and diseases, the crop is supplied with the optimum water and nutrients, and the crop is grown in a optimum environment, then you can potential production. And attainable productions is a open field experiment, not in the controlled environmental experiment, not in greenhouse. This is a open field experiment. Open field experiments, how we can take care of the pest and diseases, and also we can supply the optimum water and nutrients. That is what we are aiming for, because all the crops cannot be grown in a controlled environment experiment, and which becomes also very, very expensive. We cannot, because our requirement of the food grains are maximum rice, wheat, corn, millets. So, can you grow all this in a controlled environment experiment, which is quite impossible. So, our target, our aim, how we can maximize productions, how we can reach the attainable productions, targeted yield with proper supply of the inputs like water and nutrients, and taking care of the crops, avoiding the pest and diseases. That is what we are. So, yield gap, if you see, the yield gap is the difference in yield between the attainable yield and the actual yield, that is what we say as yield gap. So, this is as we discussed this actual productions, that is what the farmers field yield. So, example you can say now many for crops you can say for rice is around 2.63 tons per hectare. At the farmers field yield, the yield is very low, because farmers is a large scale production. They do not apply the water and nutrients as per the crop specific, because it needs a site specific, crop specific. We need to know the soil fertility, soil availability, then we can apply nutrient accordingly. So, hardly they go for the soil testing, hardly they go for the recommendation as per the crop specific. So, they apply the blanket recommendations or the normal recommendations, which is very you can say wider for different type of soil. So, the yield is not we do not get the actual yield from the farmers, we do not get the attainable yield. So, there is a potential to enhance the yield by supplying proper amount of water and nutrients. In many locations you can find India, the yield gap is around 50%, particularly eastern India, the yield gap is 50%. That means, the difference between the attainable yield and actual yield is around 50%. So, we need to have the technical interventions, particularly water and nutrient management, how to bridge this yield gap. Similarly, I have already discussed the attainable production. So, that is what is the under the well managed situations with the proper application of the water and nutrients in addition to the pest and disease control, best the maximum yield can be achieved. So, always we are targeting, we are aiming for this as a attainable yield in the open field conditions with the proper planning, taking care of the crops from the pest and disease protections, and also with proper water and nutrient management. So, this is the potential production, discuss the maximum the potential yield. This usually happens in the controlled environmental experiment. So, we are not targeting for that one, but that is only for the specific crops, high value crops, some vegetables we are growing in the greenhouse conditions. Now, also farmers are growing off season crops in the greenhouse conditions, where the proper conditions like atmospheric condition, environmental conditions, we can achieve the potential production of the crops with the maintenance of the all conditions to optimum. And this is the yield gap I was discussing as a difference between the attainable yield and actual yield, the yield gap. So, our the job is to bridge the yield gap, to minimize the yield gap. That means, this can be done if attainable yield is a particular locations, a target yield. So, we need to reach the target yield. To reach the target yield, the job is to how we can enhance the actual yield. Actual yield can be enhanced, can be increased by precise application of the water and nutrients, not excessive application. Excessive application of water and nutrient does not give the increased productions. We have to apply water very precisely as per the need of the crop, nutrients as per the need of the crop. If you go for the proper water and nutrient management, then we can reach this the target yield or the attainable yield. So, this is what the 3 production situations. So, in crop models, just I have to give you a brief idea. So, in crop models also we go for the simulations at the actual yield, attainable yield and potential yield. So, input parameters are different. If you go for the potential yield simulations, what the model says, we have the the inputs like the soil inputs, you have the weather inputs, plant genetic inputs and the management inputs. In that case, the simulations only to the factors like the weather parameters, because the potential yield, the model assumes that the crop is protected from pest and diseases and the crop does not suffer from water and nutrient stress. These modules are off, like management modules, that is made off, and this the other parameter like pest and disease module, that is also made off. Only the simulation happens, stimulates the crop, we can get the forecasted yield or the predicted yield as per the weather parameters, change of weather parameters. So, in potential production simulations, so only the weather parameter changes, the change of we see the response of the crop yield to the change in weather parameters, and where the other modules are off and the model assumes that they are taken care, that means the crop is protected from pest and diseases and the crop does not suffer from water and nutrient stress. If you go to attainable yield simulations, in that case the model simulates the effect of the water and effect of nutrients, but the model takes assumption that the crop is protected from the pest and diseases. Only you can simulate the effect of the water nutrients and also other parameters. So, model at attainable yield, you can simulate the all management parameters and the weather parameters. Model at actual yield, so there is no assumptions. It can simulate the effect of all parameters. It simulates the effect of the pest and diseases, simulate the effect of all managements as you go for the including water and nutrient different managements and simulate the effect of the weather parameters. So, these crop models are available for different production situations simulations. Many models are available for the attainable yield. Potential yield only because this is since only weather parameter. So, this is less use, we use either the attainable yield or the actual production simulation. We will be discussing when you go through model, that we will be discussing. So, in that case when you go for the different crop simulations, yield simulations, we should know what are the crop classifications. So, there the classification of crops, just a brief review. The different approaches for classifications, there is a botanical classifications, classification based upon the growth habit, climates, growing seasons, agronomical classifications. So, we are not going to discuss about the botanical, because classification essential, that gives understanding of the crop characteristic and the input management. So, for that we need to know the crop classifications. So, botanical classification, that gives like a naming of the crops like a genus and species, like a human being. We have our one of the nickname, one is the name, official name, certificate name. Similarly, crops they have the nickname and the official name, that is a certificate name, that is a botanical classifications. Like rice, rice sometimes we say rice, sometimes you say paddy also, rice. But you see the name as a known all over the world. So, botanical classification that comes from genus and species, that is Oryza sativa, that is the name of the rice, name known all over the world. But the local name, or you can say rice, we can say paddy, but scientific name is a botanical classification, scientific name, that is Oryza sativa. So, similar classification based upon the botanical classification, that we are not discussing here. Growth habit, already you know from your earlier, let us say annual crops, biennial crops or the perennial crops depending upon the growing durations. Climates, so climate classification, there are crops like tropical crops, crops like temperate crops, the climate classifications. And growing seasons also, of course, you know, growing season we have the, in India we have the major 3 growing seasons like Kharif, Rabi and the Zaid seasons, the growing seasons, and finally the agronomical classifications. If you see the classification based upon the growing seasons, so Kharif crops, the wet season crops, particularly monsoon crops, June to October, November. So, mostly we grow the warm and the wet season crops like rice, corn, cotton, jawar, bajra. So, these are the crops grown in the Kharif seasons. Rabi crops, particularly winter crops from October, November to March, the cool season crops, wheat, gram, mustard, potato, winter vegetables comes for the Rabi crops. Zaid crops, March to June, the summer season crops, particularly hot and dry climate, groundnut, watermelon. So, these are the growing seasons, and when you go for the crop modeling and simulation, usually you go for the agronomical classification. We simulate the crops as per the different agronomical classification. Why agronomical classification? This classification is essential to know the characteristic of the crop, and when you go for the input management, the crops are grouped in such a way there the management also similar, not we can say exactly similar, but somehow similar for a particular group of crops, and also they grow in a soil types, you can see that the use also, their use also similar. So, that is why based upon their the input managements and the commercial use of the crops, consumption of the crops, this is agronomic classifications, that is 10 groups we have made, that is grains or the cereal crops, legumes or the you can say the pulse crops, oil seed crops, forage crops, root and tuber crops, fiber crops, sugar crops, industrials or commercial crops, medicinal crops and energy crops. So, if you go for the crop modeling also, you can find the DSAT model we will be discussing. There we have the crops of these groups, and all the groups, there are few crops are there, you may not find all the groups, whatever the crops are there in different groups, the crops are available for the simulation analysis. So, very briefly about the different groups of the crops, you can see the grains, this particularly if you see the food, our the health depends upon the what type of food do we take, So, we do take the balanced diet is very essential to fight many diseases and to do increase the body immunity, so that the person can be healthy. In that case, you need a balanced diet. Balanced diet does not come from only one group of crops. It comes from the carbohydrate, protein, fat, minerals, vitamins, the combinations that gives a balanced diet, and you are what you eat. You remain healthy if you eat a healthy foods, and that needs a combination of the your foods from different groups. You take the cereals, you take pulses, you take oil seeds, you take the vegetables also, because most of the minerals and vitamins they come from vegetables. So, balanced diet is very essential to have a healthy body and the healthy thinking definitely. So, for these cereals particularly you get mostly carbohydrates that comes from the cereals. So, there are many cereals are there, rice, wheat, maize, sorghum, pulse millet, barley, small millets. Now, also the millets are getting popular, and the earlier millets were the poor man's cereals. Now, millets is becoming the rich man's cereals, very expensive and nutritious. Now, this is very the fiber diets. We need to have the diets, fiber diets, that is easy digestible, and they can add value toward the health. So, the millets are very healthy. Now, International Year of Millets was celebrated in 2023 probably, International Year of Millets. Now, the Government of India also promoting the farmers to grow millets. Millet is such a type of crop, this can be grown as the less inputs, less water, less nutrients, we can have a good millet production. So, there is a promotions from governments also how you can grow, and millets is good for health. So, many you can fight because many diseases keeping now doctors do recommend to have the millet crop, millet foods in the daily diets. So, these are the cereal crops you can find, and these are the scientific given common names and scientific names. So, common names vary from location to locations. Sometimes say rice you say paddy, wheat Triticum aestivum, maize we say corn, okay, corn also, that is a Gia maize scientific name, sorghum bicolor, pulse millets, Penicetum glaucums, barley, Hadium bulgur. Then there are many small millets are there. Now also farmers are trying to grow millets wherever possible, wherever the limited resource also with less water, less nutrient, we can have a good millet productions. And this is the legume crops or pulse crops. So, we get we need the protein. So, protein comes from the legume pulse. So, the major diet comes from the carbohydrate and protein. So, cereal crops and the pulse crops. So, there are depends upon the common names varies as per the location wise. So, the botanical names like you can chickpea or the Bengal gram, which is chana, it also say chana, Scicera retinums, pigeon pea or red gram, say Cadanus cajon, mung beans, root beans, cowpea, lentil. So, these are the oils. Then oilseed crops are there. So, we get the edible oils, industrial oils, different oilseed crops like peanut, rapeseed mustard, sesame, sunflower, Niger, soybean, linseed, castor. These are the oil seeds, commonly grown oil seeds in India for the either edible oils or like livestock feeds or biofuels or the industrial use. So, mostly. So, unlike rice or the rice and wheat the crops, they need the proper input management, but the oil seed crops or pulses, they do not require that much of input like rice and wheat. But now also we need to be like oil seed crops, we need to enhance the oil seed crop productions for input management with well managed conditions with water and nutrients. We must focus how to increase the pulse production also and the oil seed productions. Similarly, forage crops, crops grown primarily for the fodder crops. So, in integrated farming systems, so livestock is a part of the farming for the livestock. So, we need the forage like different Napier grass, lucerne, bersems, oat. So, these are the forage crops. In model also, depending upon the requirement, we can the students are different locations as per the need. So, the forage crops are there in that model, they can go for the simulations of the yield of the forage crops for the different management scenarios. And we have the root and tuber crops. So, these are the root crops particularly rich in the carbohydrate, vitamins and minerals. We have the carrot, beetroots, radish, turnip, sweet potato. So, these are the root crops, this is also included in the crop models. Tuber crops, particularly the potato is very common among the vegetables, the maximum production potato. So, potato in if you see among the vegetables, potato occupies a major portions, the potato, then followed by yam, cassava, these are the tuber crops, but crop models, desert model also a potato is there, also some of the underground crops also you can find this in the model. And this is a fiber crops or the sugar crops, industrials, medicinal and energy crops. So, fiber crops are there, the cotton, jute, sun hemp and flax. Then sugar crops like sugar cane, sugar beet, stevia, natural sweeteners. So, that is also very common now farmers, because many industries coming as a stevia powder, which can be mixed actually is a natural sweetener. So, this is sugar crops are there, industrial crops, commercial crops. So, tea, coffee, tobacco because they have tea board, we have the coffee board, tobacco board also there. So, they are taking care of the as a large scale real estate productions of the tea, coffee and tobacco. Medicinal crops, we have the turmeric, neem, tulsi, kalmek, black pepper. So, these are the particularly we have the medicine like Ayurvedic, the plant based products. Then we have these energy crops like sorghum, maize, Sudan grass, millet. Now, the bioenergy, so like we are producing the biodiesel, bioethanol, biodiesel productions. So, wherever the lands not used for the food crops, particularly for the human being. So, land can be diverted for this bioenergy, the energy crops where you can have the bioenergy. So, the point of a discussion here from this gives a when you go for the crop modeling and simulation, this is a brief understanding about the different type of crops are there and the importance of these crops, how the crops are grown, the growing conditions also different, we do not grow all the crops in a particular location. So, there are different ecosystems are there. We can see in India also, in our India, if you see the eastern zones, so mostly focusing for the rice and the potato systems. Of course, the vegetables depends upon the locations we go vegetables. If you see the rice and potato, and pulse crops are grown as per location specific. If you go to dry regions, particularly arid regions or the semi-arid tropics, we have the International Crop Research Institute for Semi-arid tropics, Hyderabad. So, they are mostly are growing millets, like your the pearl millet, sorghum, so small millets. So, these millets are grown there because it require less water, it require less nutrient also. With the minimum water, we can have a millet productions. So, now so those areas are very common, very well known for the millet productions. Similarly, if you go for to other locations also, different parts of the if you go to north, so there is a wheat is very common, wheat or the potato crops, winter crops very common, corn is also grown there. In western part also corn, sorghum also very commonly grown. Southern part is for the rice belt, and eastern parts go northeast part you can see the tea, coffee, those are the commercial crops are very common, and also go for integrated farming. So, students are from the different locations of the from the country, and you may have the different requirement for the simulations or the yield forecasting. So many crops are the different we discuss the model that has different crops are included, but when we will discuss about the principles, how you go for yield forecasting, what are the conditions you go for yield forecasting, and what are the input parameters you need for the yield forecasting, and the purpose of yield forecasting is only to advise farmers a precise input management. If you go for the you do not know what is the weather of the next year, right. So, if you know the based upon the previous understanding, if you know the simulate the weather of the next years, then with that we can run the crop model and we will go for the forecasting of the as a crop for the location specific, we can go for the simulations, and you can advise particularly for the farming community or the policy makers what should be the good crop planning or the crop selection criteria and the input readiness, so that you can avoid any loss due to the abnormal or the weather or the weather variability. So, that information that given to the government officials, and also whenever there is a crop is grown in the field, crop is in the field itself, we need to know as a yield prediction different crop growth stages. As you go for stage predictions, that gives understanding whether the crop is at the optimum growth or needs a attention or different management to achieve this maximum growth. So, that also the periodic predictions on season, the on field on season prediction is required to take a corrective, the intermittent corrective measures. So, that is what we need to know. The purpose is know your crops from your different locations, focus your crops we are going to advise to a farming community, and know about the model how you can go for predictions. It can particularly help the input management, precision input management to take care of the crops from the different abnormal weather or the climate risk management or market risk also. Sometimes the farmers go for commercial cultivation as a to have a good output. Then we have to go for market study, do the market study, how the price fluctuate, accordingly make your planning with the market and weather, so that you can get a maximum productions at the end of the harvest that can give a maximum return to the farmer. The idea is increase productions, increase profitability to our farmers with sustainability of the resources and the environments, and give a good income to the farmers. So, this is the brief about the crops so we will discuss the next sessions about this different type of the crop production system brief idea, then probably slowly we will move to the simulation exercise. With this I thank you all, thank you.